Hello everybody, today we welcome back to the JAYEMM fleet and the channel after nearly 2 years away, my 1999 Ferrari 550 Maranello, otherwise known as the Rosso Corsa Judas. And in this video, I'm going to be explaining what happened, why it was away for quite so long, how much it's cost me this time, and whether this is going to be the final straw for me and my first Ferrari. First things first, the 550 is going absolutely nowhere. And the reason for that is a long time ago, I discovered something that I call the forgiveness factor. And I think it's fairly obvious from the name what it's all about. It'll likely not surprise you to hear that I came up with this concept when I became a Lotus owner. The 550 actually last saw my driveway at the end of 2022, and naturally, when it reappeared last week, carried home courtesy of the great people over at We Move It, who I'm very, very thankful I found, because I don't know about you, but finding decent, reliable, and reasonably priced transport firms is, well, it's a bit of a nightmare, to be honest, and I've had a whole bunch of horror stories, including the day I found somebody in the morning unloading my very noisy E92 M3 into a neighbour's driveway. The neighbour that doesn't like noisy cars. But I've had none of this with We Move It. They've always been very good, and they can either drive cars or transport them on an open trailer. I know some people would always want a closed trailer for something like this, but honestly, I drive my cars. It's pointless. It's just extra expense. And in the interest of fairness and balance, they did knock a few quid off the transport fee for this, but I've been using them for quite a while already. They've transported my MGs all over the place, and they've even brought me a car of their own, because the founder of the firm, the lovely James, has the VW East German radio car that you might have seen me driving. So I think we can all safely call him a bit of an oddball petrol head. That's probably why I get on with him quite so well. Anyway, the 550. When a car's been away for nearly 2 years and it comes back, it's almost like getting it for the first time again. You see it, and in the 18 months or just over it had actually been away, I'd seen it once and it wasn't in a great state because it was all pulled apart, and it was a bit like that moment on Car SOS where they bring the family in to show them the sort of flaky husk that used to be their partner's car or whatever, and they go, "Ooh dear, that's not so good, is it?" So I saw this about 6 months ago, but when it came back to me, it was all back together and good. And the first thing I thought was, my life, doesn't that look good? In fact, I went to a favourite pub the other day, and even the lady who works behind the bar, who's not really into cars at all, said that she really liked this car. And the landlord, who is into his cars, said that he really liked this car. I bring a lot of nice cars there, and very, very seldom do they actually comment on them. In fact, almost never does she comment on the car. So that tells you a little bit about the universal appeal of the 550. I know a lot of people are worried about owning a Ferrari because it's a bit too flashy and you'll get grief from people. Well, I'll tell you the solution to that. Own an old one and people will love you. I've never had anything but positive comments when driving this about. I think people now see it in the same way they would an old Jaguar or something. It's just a nice old car. Even being bright red, it's not really in your face or garish in the same way that the F12 is, and certainly not a mid-engine car. Actually, the F12 I never get any hassle either, but the mid-engine stuff I think people see a little bit differently. And every year I think this car ages just a little bit better. In its early days, funnily enough, it wasn't actually all that well received, with St. Clarkson himself actually saying it looks a little bit too much like a Mark IV Toyota Supra. I mean, they've both got a scoop in the bonnet, and I think there ends the similarities for me. He later recanted his wicked words, and rightly so, and it became one of his favourite cars of all time, and as it happens, it's now mine too. I always wanted one of these because I recall in one of Jeremy's videos, he called this the best handling car in the world ever. And he wasn't alone, because years later, Eva magazine also crowned it the greatest handling car or greatest driver's car of all time. Now, as it happens, because 2020 when I bought this was a very weird time, the first time I ever got to drive a Ferrari 550 was just after I'd bought one. It was a bit of a gamble, but one that I'm very happy to say paid off, because this is such a good car to drive. But before you've even got the chance to sample that, you'll have opened the door to be greeted with this glorious 1990s interior. And it's one of the reasons that I wanted a 550 specifically, and not a 575. You see, for me, the definitive Ferrari is probably the F355, but there are a great many reasons why I haven't bought one of those. However, the 90s to me is just peak Ferrari, and there are a few things about this that remind you that this car came from that era. The analog dials, the trio of them up here, the acreage of leather. This car's in the classic colour scheme of Rosso Corsa over cream and then with Bordeaux carpets. It's a fabulous and magnificent thing. The view out is spectacular. There's so much glass in it. It feels microscopic compared to the F12. Even though it's actually quite a bit wider when parked on the driveway next to my DB9, it's not daunting to drive at all. And there's that. A lot of people don't realise this, but the 575, the facelift of this car, was the first one to introduce the F1 gearbox. The 550 was supposed to get it, and there's even a little window on the dash where the gear display would have gone. But for whatever reason, they never made it work. The 355 then wound up becoming the first car, I think, in the world to have that type of gearbox. The 550s, though, well, they were the last front-engined Ferrari available explicitly as a manual. And what a manual it is. Famously finicky. When cold, this doesn't really like going into second. You've got to either double declutch or skip and go into third. But it does have a personality, and when it's warm and considerably happier, it is a delight. Every control in this car is beautiful. It's wonderfully weighted, it's nice to drive slow, and it's great to drive fast. And that engine, it's a powerhouse. Nearly 500 horsepower, 420 pound-foot of torque. These are figures that more or less match the DB9, a car that came out over a decade later. The spread of torque and power through the rev range is incredible. It pulls hard from effectively nothing, and it sings all the way to 7,500 RPM. This is a sensational thing. Weirdly, it's also the most economical of all my Ferraris. I don't quite know how that works. I mean, it's no surprise the F12 is not quite as good, but the 430 Scuderia I thought would be better, being much lighter, 300 kilos or so, with a lower capacity engine, 4 fewer cylinders, modern fuel injection, and probably one eye on economy. But no, over a long motorway journey, this will do 22 to the gallon, that'll do 20. Combine this with the fact the 550 has a 105-litre fuel tank. Ferrari say it's 114, but it's generally accepted that that's wrong. And this is a brilliant GT car. The suspension is also set up just brilliantly. It's so good, this thing. In regular mode, it's comfortable but still communicative. Corners, relatively flatly. Then if you want to have a little bit more fun, you can put it into sport. It'll loosen off the traction control and the dampers firm up a little, and it just works. It's a car that you can have great fun in at 15 mile an hour, 50, and certainly beyond. I love it. The fact this one also has 104,503 miles on and is mine, there is no finance on this car, I own it outright, means that I'm going to enjoy keeping that mileage counter going. Such a special car, this, and I'm so lucky to have it. But Why exactly has it been away for quite so long? If you've been following the story, you'll know that when I bought this car, it had already had quite a bit spent on it. The previous owner to me spent about £17,000 on it, and I hoped that meant I wouldn't have to do anything like that. Unfortunately, this turned out to be wrong. And in the first year, I did mostly maintenance-y sort of bits. The car then got to the point where this is actually now, I'm not sure I've actually said this on the channel or not, this car is Classic A certified. Now, I don't have the certificate because I intend to go and collect it from Maranello. A few years ago, this was already agreed. They said, do you want to come and collect the certificate from the factory, get a tour? Of course I do. How special would that be? Take my Ferrari to the factory. I've got to get the picture, haven't I, at the factory gate, at that famous little arch. And it makes me emotional just thinking that I can do that in my Ferrari. But that's future plan. That's not going to happen this year. That's got to be next year at the earliest. I then had to tend to a couple of other small things that the car had had when I got it, but weren't covered by the premium program. So there was a very slight weep on one of the rocker cover gaskets. The car went in, and that then unfortunately turned out to be camshaft seals, which meant it was not a few £100 job, it was a few £1,000 job, and we did a few other bits and got stuff sorted, and then basically we thought everything was kind of done. However, the car went back in for something, and Meridian noticed that it had started grumbling, and this turned out to be the oil pump in the process of failing. Luckily, we caught it. There was no damage to the engine whatsoever. Very, very fortunate. The filters in it did their job. But unfortunately, the sump had to come off as part of fixing all of that, and when it went to putting it back on, it was noticed that at some point in time, presumably when the car wasn't worth all that much money, somebody had essentially ruined one of the threads for one of the studs on the bottom of the engine, and it was in a very, very awkward place to get to. And we tried everything that we could, and in the end, the only solution for it was to take the engine out. Now, everybody likes moaning at how much it costs to take the engine out on a 355. And what you must remember is that the 355's engine is designed to come out. Ferrari have built it in such a way that when you do the cam belt service, you effectively take out the whole rear subframe. The engine, the suspension, everything all come out together. It's actually quite neat and tidy, and I would never recommend anybody do that service any other way. The 550 though, the theory is there is no service item that requires the engine to come out, so it shouldn't have to. Unfortunately, we needed it to, and it's a big job. You have to start at the back of the car because it's transaxle, so you've got to remove the gearbox, you've got to remove all of the torque tube through in the middle, the bell housing on the back of the engine, and then eventually crane it out. Happily, when we did, we found that actually there wasn't all that much extra wrong with the car. Corrosion was really minimal, and it all went back together, and that was a really, really big build. But you know about that one. I made a whole video on it, and if you want to know more, I'll put a link to that in the description down below. However, I was then really excited, having just spent a fortune to get the car back, remind myself of the forgiveness factor and enjoy it. But as soon as it landed back on my driveway, I noticed something wasn't quite right. The steering fell off. I went to maneuver the car and it juddered a little bit. I thought, oh, this is weird. I then figured maybe the best thing to do is just to keep driving the car, keep an eye on it, see if it gets worse, or hopefully just gets better and fixes itself. It's a 25-year-old Italian car, it does happen. But though for the most part it was okay, every now and again you'd go through a bend and the steering would just do that, which isn't right. It's disconcerting, and I knew something wasn't right. I knew that at some point I had to get it back down to Meridian to get looked at, but I had a few other things going on. I needed to save up some money, having just spent a fortune on it, and I hoped I'd still be able to enjoy the car. I knew they wouldn't have sent it back to me unsafe or anything, so I did that. And then I took it over to Silverstone for the Ferrari Challenge, and the thing just started playing up. Couldn't lock it, then I couldn't unlock it, then the alarm would go off. And this started becoming a thing. At night, the alarm would just go off, and it'd be basically impossible to stop it unless I disconnected the main power to the car, and then it'd be difficult to lock it. So this was frustrating. This was very, very frustrating. And at that point, I figured, right, okay, this is not doable anymore. The car's got to go down there. So it went down to Meridian. They got it in and said, yeah, okay, the alarm, that's not a biggie, and actually, couple of years earlier, they had mentioned to me that the sirens on these, after about 20 years, they do just fail. We had another issue with the car a while back that we thought was the siren, but it wasn't, so we hadn't replaced it then, and they said, yeah, you just need to replace it. It's not an expensive or big item, let's get it done. So I thought, okay. They then looked at the power steering and said, yeah, it does seem that the power steering pump is probably on its last legs and does need doing. So I said, okay, quote me on that. They came back and said it's £2,500. They got the part, they can get it in stock, not a problem. And I also thought, you know what, while it's back there again and we've got stuff to do, there is something that has been bugging me about this car from the day that I got it, and that's the sticky switches. Now, if somehow you're still not familiar with that issue, well, it is what it says on the tin. All old Ferraris this era, Maseratis as well, and actually other brands too, but for some reason it's always the Italians that get stick for it. Well, their switches, they have this coating on, a rubberized coating that when new feels kind of nice, but then 10, 15 or 20 years later, well, it just falls apart. It goes all horrid and tacky. And this coating is on all sorts of stuff in this car. It looked and felt horrid. It really did bring the whole place down. So I thought, right, okay, let's get this sorted. If you were to ask the internet, you would be given a whole host of different solutions to this problem. And the most cost-effective, as far as some people see it, is to simply take the item apart and rub it down with alcohol. This will remove all of the coating from it, and you'll be given back a flat black plastic switch toggle or whatever. And though technically you have removed the sticky from it, you've removed everything from it. And what you're left with is a fairly cheap, nasty switch that isn't really that nice to look at or to touch. So, for those who don't want to do that, there are lots of companies out there that will effectively remove the coating and then reapply a new one, but it's typically a hard coating. The best company that I know for this are Sticky RX over in America, New York, specifically Buffalo. I've actually been there, seen the process, and there's a reason it's not cheap. It's very fiddly and it is very delicate, and they do a very, very good job. But the coating they apply is not factory correct, and having spent quite a bit of time in a few different cars, I decided that I really would like, if possible, to get back the original factory soft touch coating. I think it makes it feel a little bit nicer. So I found a company in Britain called Sticky Plastics. Now, Sticky RX would have done a great deal for me. Sticky Plastics, they don't know me, they just said, yeah, here's the prices, send your bits if you want them done. So I said, okay, but he could do the soft touch coating, and I decided that's what I wanted. So I sent off basically half the interior to him. Well, I had Meridian do that, and he said he could do it. Even better, while I was negotiating with him and working out timetable and schedules and things, I mentioned that I was needing to get the power steering pump on the car redone. Though initially I was just going to pay Ferrari to get a new one in, I did suddenly stop and think and go, hang on a minute. It's an old 1990s Ferrari. What's the betting that this power steering pump is the same as a Fiat Coupe Turbo or an Alfa Romeo 145 or something daft like that? And I don't need to pay £2,500 for it. I can get one much, much cheaper. Unfortunately, it turns out that it is a bespoke Ferrari item, and the companies who made it, ZF and I think Bosch as well, they don't sell them new anymore. When they did, they were 400 quid. And I'm kind of loath to pay over £2,000 for something that should be 400 quid. So I thought, well, it is just a pump. Surely it can be refurbished or rebuilt. I sent a few emails to a few different companies specialising in power steering stuff, and they said, yeah, we can do it for about 400 quid. I mentioned that this was being done to Sticky Plastics, and he said, well, I can do it. Send it to me with all the sticky bits. Okay, yeah, cool, sure, done. So I sent it over, we agreed a timetable and a price, and he got to work. He contacted a friend of his at ZF who sent over a rebuild kit for it. We couldn't fix everything, but effectively we could restore it to essentially as good as new condition. It will, I am told, at some point fail again, but that's likely in another 100,000 miles. So that's not a problem. The bits were done, packaged up and returned to me actually far quicker than I had expected. Then I got a call from Meridian saying, how much have you paid to have these parts redone? Because we've got them and they're not very good. They sent me over a few pictures, and it was clear what had happened. The power steering pump and all the pieces had been sent in the same package, and the plastic bag that the power steering pump was in had split, spilling a load of mineral oil out and coating half of the other parts. And some of them had clearly been damaged by this, but some of them also just, well, they just didn't look very good, to be quite honest with you. So I got back in touch with Sticky Plastics and said, here, this is pretty poor. You've charged a king's ransom here for these parts, and they're not good enough. And to be fair to him, he got back to me straight away and said, yeah, no, I can see what's gone on there. That's not good enough, is it? Send everything back that's not decent enough. I will sort it. So we did. And then a month went by, 2 months went by, and he then apparently was ill. And of course, I don't want to pester someone that's unwell, but also this was holding up the entire project by this time. And yeah, a sort of 4-week job wound up turning into a near 6 or 7 month one, with constant back and forths of, yeah, the parts are done, they'll be with you next week. And then 2 weeks later, where are they? Oh no, something happened, I couldn't get them done. And there was actually a point where I thought I might have to drive all the way to him, which is a long, long way away, to try and get the parts, because, well, they're valuable and some of them are irreplaceable. Good news is, as you can probably guess, they're now back. They're in the car, and though they're not perfect, you know what? It's a huge improvement over how the car looked before, and it is letting me enjoy it just that little bit more. I am also delighted to say that the alarm no longer goes off in the middle of the night, although I think it might still have an error. It's gonna go back to Meridian soon for something else I'll mention in a minute, and yeah, that's gonna get sorted. But the car locks, unlocks, and doesn't wake me and the neighbours up at 3 a.m, so that is a win. And yeah, I'm really, really happy to have this back. It isn't Meridian's fault at all that it took quite so long as it did, and to be honest, there's a lot of time where it was me waiting to get stuff sorted, and then the rest of it was waiting for these sticky switches to come back. As soon as they reappeared, Meridian got the car all back together and sorted in a matter of a couple of weeks. They were fairly efficient. And it is good, this thing. So good. But I know what you all want to know. How much has it cost me? Well, let's tell you. I have here in my hand a piece of paper, 3 actually, and we all know whenever any Briton says that, something very bad is about to happen. We'll start with the one from Sticky Plastics, and the total list of things they fixed includes the air vents, the toggle switches, the round buttons, the ashtray mirror control trim, the HVAC handbrake, steering column shrouds, the glove box, that's the release button, the bonnet release, the radio knobs, a 7-switch trim, that's the bit in the middle, and also the power steering pump, which he actually did not charge me for, so thank you, I suppose, for that. And the total of this, including VAT and shipping, was £2,901. Ouch. But in fairness, of all the other companies I've looked at that offer a service like this, that's kind of in line with all their prices. On now to the one from Meridian, and they did a number of different things. First off, taking out all of those sticky parts to be then refinished and of course refitted. That was 750 quid. Then the check straps for the doors, that was actually the single biggest item from them that I had to pay for. They did both doors, and this one is working perfectly. Nice, lovely and smooth. The driver's door though is not. It's always sounded a bit like that. I spoke to Meridian about it already, and they said it really shouldn't be doing that. It didn't when they had it, and I've actually seen what I think is the problem. It's just a little pin that might just need a little bit of help to get itself back in place, or possibly replacement, and they're going to take care of that and sort that at their expense. They're good like that, and these are old cars. These things happen. It's not going to be a big job to fix. It's annoying, which is why I mention it, but it will get done. Anyway, they had to pull the things apart, sort some bits out, replace the check straps, and in the case of the driver's door, they actually had to re-weld a couple of pieces to it, because over time the two sort of skins of the door, the two halves, had begun to separate, and that was part of the noise apparently, and that all cost £1,140 and 58 pence. Removing and refitting the refurbished power steering pump, that was £250. While the car was there, they also said, it's kind of been long enough that it is technically due a service. Do you want to do one? Do you not? It hasn't really done any mileage. And I thought, you know what? Let's just get oil and filter done. Like, let's just be comprehensive here. That was 470 quid. For reference, there is 11 litres of oil in these things and 2 oil filters. I know some people consider that still far too much to pay for an oil change, and on anything else I would agree, but the car's got a pretty comprehensive Ferrari specialist or main dealer history, and I want to preserve that. It made more sense to get it done while it was already there. It lost me no more time. It also needed its first MOT since 2022, which I'm happy to say it passed with flying colours, to the sum of £54.84. They had their interior guy come in and just tidy up a few little bits, but they didn't charge me for that. They also found that the throttle pedal was stiffer than it should have been. Now, this is something a few people, including Damien from the Car Guys and others, have commented on, but I'm used to throttle pedals in Ferraris of this age just being stiff. That's how they are, so it never really bothered me. I suspect that being in storage for quite so long didn't do it any favours, and they said it really did need sorting, and that actually was fairly easy to do, only 150 quid. On a right-hand drive 355, it's a devil of a job because the cable goes from the pedal up, around, back here, and then into the engine, and that's part of the reason that it's so stiff. Here, being front engine, much simpler, and that was £149. And then to fix the pesky alarm, they put a new siren in. That was £280 for the part and about £100 for the labour. They also did a couple of other interior touches as well. That was about 100 odd quid, and all in, their bill came to £4,052. So once you then combine those two together, along with the shipping fee from We Move It, that all came to just about £7,500. A lot more than I was hoping to spend on the car, considering it had barely done any mileage since my last big spend. But, as I've already discussed, because I love it so damn much, and it really is that good, there's only one thing I can see that I can do. That's get in it, drive it, and make it sing for its supper. I want to say a big thanks to all of you for watching. Don't forget, hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.